You're all being very, very quiet, and I appreciate that. But we're going to start the Joint Town Council Parking Authority Redevelopment Agency meeting of September 6th, 2011. First, I'd ask that if you've not already done so, would you turn off your cell phones or put them on mute? And Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Rice.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Joe Brzezinski.
Here. As is our tradition, we have a member of the leadership group of our young people in our community. And tonight's presenter is Luke Lenhart. Luke is a sixth grader at St. Andrew's Episcopal. I want to say a few things about Luke before he comes up. He's up here in front with his dad. Luke was the Davis Avenue School Student Council in 2009, 2010, and 2011, and he was elected council secretary in 2010 and 2011. Obviously, no term limits at Davis Avenue School. Davis Avenue also was privileged to have Luke as a school safety patrol officer, and he was selected captain for 2010-2011. He's in Los Gatos United Soccer in the BU 12 team, the Lynx, and they were division champs last year, so congratulations, Luke. And he's on the BU 12 Panthers team this fall. He is a four-time first-place winner in South Bay Endurance Jenny's Light Triathlon Series in the summers of 2010 and 2011. In his spare time, Luke plays golf in the Coyote Creek Cubs program. He's on St. Andrew's cross-country team this fall, and he has other interesting things about him that he'd like to share. He is currently reading J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, not once, but twice, and he loves to read, and he's really good at computers. So without further ado, let's welcome Luke to lead us in the pledge. Luke? And if we would all turn towards our flag and offer the salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's thank Luke for being with us. And Luke, we have a nice parting gift for you when you come back by. Probably the most articulate reading of our salute that I've heard in an awful long time. Thank you again, Luke, and thank you, Dad, for bringing Luke with us, okay? The next item on our agenda is our closed session report. Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. The council met in closed session as duly noticed on the agenda. Council took no action, and there's nothing to report out this evening.
Well done. The next item is is our council manager matters, but before we do that, I'd just like to remind everyone in our public tonight who wishes to speak on an item on our agenda or under verbal communications to fill out one of those tan cards that's in front of you in the seat back and bring it to our clerk over here on my left, your right, and we'll make sure we get you up for presentation at that time. All right, council matters. Any member of council wish to tell us anything that we should know for tonight? Seeing none, manager?
Mayor and Council, I have several items that I would like to list chronologically for you and our broader community, given all of the activities and deadlines prior to your next meeting in 2 weeks. This Friday, September 9th, is the deadline to sign up on the town's website for our annual community-wide garage sale to be held on Saturday, October 1st. Sign up this week to be included in the online directory and map of local garage sale locations. On Sunday, September 11th, the town will join with cities and towns nationwide in a moment of remembrance to honor the victims and first responders of 9/11, which occurred just 10 years ago. In Los Gatos, available police and other public safety units will sound their sirens at the Police Operations Bullet Building on the Boulevard near Blossom Hill for 1 minute starting at 10 a.m. And next week, we'll be starting a critical and challenging phase for our new library to improve the streets and to increase parking. However, for the next 3 weeks, Fiesta and Villa Streets will be closed for repaving, as will the main lots at the Civic Center and the Adult Recreation Center. Civic Center customers are encouraged to park in the library parking lot off of Pageant and on Main Street adjacent to the Civic Center lawn. On Saturday, September 24th, the town and the Chamber of Commerce will be hosting our summer-ending downtown wine walk. The wine walks always sell out, so residents are encouraged to sign up quickly at the Chamber of Commerce website. Last, we were informed just last week that Caltrans will soon be starting the much-needed and long-awaited resurfacing of the pedestrian bridge over Highway 17 between Old Town and Forbes Mill. The work might have started as early as this week, but we are now trying to schedule it for October or at night to not interfere with the completion of the Civic Center street and parking improvements that I mentioned earlier. Now we come to that part of the agenda called Did You Know? An opportunity to highlight services, small and large, provided by the town. For tonight's Did You Know? I'd like to call forward someone that our council and our community know well, recently appointed Community Outreach Coordinator Jackie Rose.
Good evening, Mayor, community, staff. Now that school is back in session, I'd like to take a moment to speak to you about Los Gatos Prepared and specifically about emergency preparedness at our schools. In partnership with the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department, our schools currently provide an emergency operations plan. They use the FEMA-approved incident command system for their crisis management team and provide periodic training and practice for their teachers, staff, and students. The Los Gatos Montesino Police Department has provided guidance to our schools in the planning and implementation of their emergency preparedness plans. And this year, as part of Los Gatos Prepared program, we have provided our public and private schools with an emergency or disaster information page, a family emergency communication plan, and how to be prepared for natural disasters. We have requested each school to make this information accessible to both parents and students through their monthly correspondence and on their websites. This information has been distributed to our local schools, both public and private, and is available to our community by visiting www.losgatosca.gov/Los Gatos Prepared. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'm available.
Any questions for Ms. Rose? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
And Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to take this moment on behalf of the town attorney, the clerk administrator, and our office to introduce you to Heather St. John, who's being trained in the deputy clerk duties by Stephanie Angulo.
Okay, as we speak. Welcome. Thank you for being with us. All right. The next item on our agenda is the consent item. And this is a series of actions that can be acted on in a single motion. I'd ask, first of all, that you note there is a desk item on this is on desk item on the minutes of August 15. It's item 7A. And this was a correction on page 11 of the August 15 minutes. And it's under item 12 as amended. And so if you wouldn't mind noting that for that particular item on the calendar. Is there any member of council who wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing none, is there any member of our public who wishes to pull an item from consent? All right, seeing none, can I have a motion?
Move approval of the consent calendar.
It's been moved and,
Seconded with the desk item
Okay.
modification.
Yes.
so there's a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar with the amended item 7A. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We move on now to,
Mr. Mayor?
okay, and we have to ask our clerk to read the title of item 8. That's the redevelopment agency conditional opt-in and agency transfer payment agreement, since it is an ordinance.
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos enacted pursuant to Health and Safety Code Section 34193 to conditionally elect and implement participation by the Town of Los Gatos and the Town of Los Gatos Redevelopment Agency in the alternative voluntary redevelopment program pursuant to Part 1.9 of the California Community Redevelopment Law.
Okay, thank you. And we so moved and approved that. That brings us to verbal communications. This is an opportunity for anyone in our public to speak on an item that's not on tonight's agenda. Not on tonight's agenda. Madam Clerk, we have no cards for this at this point. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on something and like to come forward and submit a card afterwards? Then we can move on to other business, and that is item 9 in our agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'm have interest in residential rental real estate within the town of Los Gatos, and I'm going to have to recuse myself on item 9.
So the vice mayor is recused. Any other recusal? Yes, Councilmember Leonardis.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I also have a rental property in Los Gatos, so I have to recuse myself as well.
All right. So is there anyone else who has rental property they'd like to recuse? Seeing none, gentlemen, you're recused. We'll call you back when we finish this item. Now that they're gone and they can't hear us, there is a desk item for number 9. It's in front of us. It's got a red line version of some recommended changes by the Rent Advisory Board. Any questions about the desk item for our members? All right. So let's start item 9, and I believe Ms. Faulkner is going to do the presentation for staff.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Council. The town's rent dispute resolution program has been in place for over 30 years. The ordinance and regulations which govern the program have been modified over the years based on recommendations from a rent advisory committee. That committee existed of 2 tenants, 2 landlords, and a neutral chair. The committee's last project was to review rent increases resulting from increased costs of debt service. The report before you presents the Rent Advisory Committee's recommendations. They struggled with this issue for at least a couple of years, looked at lots of options as far as changes to that particular issue, and decided that the options that they looked at either favored the tenants or the landlords or were simply too complicated to administer. So after much review, they came up with a set of recommendations which they feel simply clarified the ordinance and did not make significant changes. The California Apartment Association representatives provided input to the process and at the time supported the changes. They have, however, reconsidered and have submitted additional changes which are included in the council report. Staff recommends that council approve the ordinance and related regulations as recommended by the Rent Advisory Committee. We have provided a desk item and a computer software error, I should note, changed the B and C to A and B. So the ordinance is correct. My apologies for the error on the desk item. There are a few people here in the audience on this issue. Martin Eichner of Project Sentinel, which manages the program on a day-to-day basis, is here and can answer any detailed questions that you may have. In addition, Sue Fish, who was the chair of the Rent Advisory Committee for many years, is in the audience, as is Joshua Howard of the California Apartment Association.
All right, any questions for Ms. Faulkner? Yes, Madam McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if staff wants to address this now or wait until after we have public comment, but I would like to know what staff's opinion is on the 2 additional modifications that's being recommended by the association.
The changes on surface look simple. What they would do is significantly weaken the ordinance in that right now there are the ordinance at the top says that you have to consider both a formula, and I won't go into detail, but the 80% of the increased cost of debt service, and there's that whole section, or a number of standards that are listed further down in the ordinance changes. So by putting that word "or" in there, both of those considerations don't need to be made, and one could simply use the formula and not consider all of the things that are detailed in the bottom portion of the ordinance. So in short terms, it weakens the ordinance that we have.
All right, keep going.
So, what I'm struggling with is maybe it's just a formatting issue on this first one, but the heading on that first section is when costs of debt service deemed to be reasonable, and then it says here's what you do, and then the next section is additional standards to rent increases when increase exceeds the base annual increase. And of course, this is like way over my head, and I know they struggled with it for years, so I really don't know all of the nuances of this, but it seems like those are 2 different scenarios. And so having the first one hook into the second one is not making sense, just from a common sense point of view, doesn't make sense to me on that. And then also, I know the concern is, and I'm sure they'll speak to it, how you would calculate a rate of return on the investment. I don't understand how that would work.
This may be an appropriate time to hear from the audience members, and I believe Martin Eichner can also respond.
Before we go to the audience members, any other questions of staff at this point? Then we do have a couple of speakers, and I'm going to hear Martin Eichner first. And Martin, if you introduce yourself for our viewing audience.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, council members and Mr. Mayor. My name is Martin Eichner. I'm the Director of Dispute Resolution Programs for Project Sentinel. We're the nonprofit agency that has been administering this program for about the last 12 years. I personally participated in discussions over the last 4 or 5 years focused on this issue of what to do about the debt service pass-through, which has always been a challenging issue in terms of trying to adjust how it should work. So mostly I'm here to answer questions, hopefully. I will, however, say that remember that this is a process which ultimately goes to arbitration if the parties don't reach agreement. In our experience, the parties do reach agreement in mediation and work out a resolution between themselves in about all but 1 or 2 cases a year. So very few cases have ever gone to arbitration under this ordinance. But when they do, the arbitrator has to interpret the ordinance. And part of what brought us back to the RAC was the lack of clarity for the arbitrators as to which factors should be considered, particularly in a debt service pass-through. And again, I don't want to get into statutory interpretation, but there's one section that says it has to be reasonable anyway. And we had a town attorney's opinion saying, yes, no matter what else, the increase has to be reasonable. And then, on the other hand, there's other language which casts some doubt as to whether that's a requirement or not. So the overall goal here was to spell out, yes, you have to meet the formula, but then you also have to show that your property meets these other standards of reasonableness stated in the ordinance and then spelled out in more detail in what are known as the regulations, which are much more complex, much more comprehensive in terms of the requirements. So that was the goal here, to make it clear that all increases above 5% have to be reasonable, which we already know, but to spell out what is reasonable in each type of pass-through increase. So I don't know if I've answered the question or not, trying to be sort of general here. Let me just answer one more question. In terms of the specific factors such as rate of return, that's also been discussed in detail, and essentially that it was decided with the Apartment Owners Association input that was to be determined in an arbitration hearing if necessary, with both sides presenting evidence and any opinion on those sorts of issues, as opposed to trying to spell out what all these factors meant in the ordinance itself, in which case we might have about a 30-page ordinance. So again, it is an approach taken in our society. It may not be the best, but it is, okay, let the arbitrator decide it based on the individual case and based on the evidence that's presented by the parties in that case.
Mr. Eichner, I'd ask Councilwoman McNutt, did that get to the issue that you have in the language of those two sections?
Oh,
all right. Do you want to reframe that for Mr. Eichner?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to hear from all of the speakers, and then maybe during council discussion, we can call on them if we need additional clarification.
All right. That sounds good. All right. We do have a question, Mr. Eichner. Councilwoman Inspector.
Thank you. The specific issues I have relate to the suggestions for modifications that we received in the letter. Did you see that letter?
I did.
Okay. On our desk item attachment 2, we have those changes in various colors. I guess the simple question is, maybe not a simple answer, but the simple question is, what is your input to the modifications that are being requested?
The modification requested by the Apartment Owners Association would essentially reverse the discussions and essentially ignore the discussions over the years that we held about this pass-through issue, and essentially would go back to an interpretation that has always been in the air but which was never accepted, which is as long as the apartment owner meets the formula, in other words, the 70% of 80%, as long as they meet that formula, then there's no other consideration of the pass-through. It has to be allowed. That's an argument that's been made over the years and usually rejected. But I just want to point out what the implication of that would be, that a property owner would have no duty to show that he or she had maintained their property at any kind of decent level or in any level equivalent to other market properties in the area, and instead could just continue to refinance without making any improvements every time he or she wants an increase. So it again would remove any of the requirements that the property owner show that there's a reason for the pass-through in terms of improving the property or otherwise even maintaining the property.
Thank you.
Before you go, back to Councilwoman McNutt. If we can get those questions you have answered while we're still here, rather than having to reopen the hearing, if I heard you correctly, two concerns. One is that the two titles don't seem to be aligned in some ways. That when you talk about when cost of debt service is deemed to be reasonable, and then additional standards applicable to rent increases when increases exceed the base. The term additional would sound to me to be in some ways a follow-on to A, when costs of debt service. Is this important that this flow accordingly, or can we let this stand as two separate items?
Mayor, actually, his last two sentences made sense to me, so.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. So I'm understanding why there's the concern about adding the word "or" between brackets 1 and brackets 2. So my remaining, and I'm sure others might have different opinion that we'll hear about, but my remaining question is how you calculate a rate of return on investment.
Let me go back to one question about the numbering. See, under 14.80.315A is essentially the operation and maintenance and rehab pass-through. Then B is the debt service pass-through, and these titles have been on the ordinance forever, so, and I agree, they're not necessarily very helpful. But A and B were the two different types of pass-throughs, and that's why C says these are the standards now for both A and B, which was never clear before as to whether C applied to just A or applied to A and B. So we decided, again, to make as few changes as possible, but to make it clear that C applies to both types of major debt, both types of pass-throughs, the operation maintenance and the debt service, which are the two common pass-throughs we see. Anyway, so that was the effort that was made here, and it obviously was less than perfect. So, but that was why we put the changes into C. So, in the sense, in the hope that it would be clear that both A and B are subject to the same requirements in terms of reasonableness. But still, going back to the issue of how you calculate a reasonable rate of return. Again, this is not an administrative; it's an arbitration. So both parties would have to come in and show what they felt the rate of return was for that property, or how they would go about doing it. And other than what's in the regulations, which is not that much more detail on this issue, that's how it has to be done.
So the burden of proof is on the individuals who are in the arbitration.
Right. Each side's supposed to bring their evidence and any other weight to bear on that issue in that case for that property.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Eichner? Thank you, Mr. Eichner. And Joshua Howard.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, or Town Council, Joshua Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the California Apartment Association Tri-County Division. We're the nonprofit trade association representing rental property owners and managers in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz County. I come here tonight to speak on the issue that's before you about the proposal to amend the rent mediation dispute resolution ordinance. And first I want to commend the former Rent Advisory Committee for spending the better part of close to a decade grappling with this issue. We would first contend that there is not an exigent reason to adopt any changes to the rent ordinance as it is presented. In staff's report, they mentioned that in the past several years, Project Sentinel has received virtually no phone calls or requests for mediation or arbitration. However, in recognizing the new rental market we live in today, there's been a slight uptick in the volume that all mediation agencies are receiving in response to the economy we're in today. What we have put before you is what we believe strikes a fair balance between the needs of rental property owners to finance their properties and provide quality housing to residents, while providing fairness and a reasonable process for the residents who live in rental property. What we are asking for is what we believe are minor amendments to the town proposal before you. And currently, a rental property owner is required to show that they have met I'll call it a quantitative standard to have a debt service pass through meet the standards to be approved through an arbitration or mediation. Under this proposal before you, not only would the owner be required to prove that he or she has met the quantitative financial standard, but would also be required to meet a host of additional factors, which Mr. Eichner spoke to. Some of the factors we contend going to an arbitration, the process by which an arbitrator would consider them, there is no standards that are being established. We also believe that there is no weight that is being prescribed as to what factor would be more important than the other. And most importantly, the issue on rate of return, we have serious difficulties that would potentially require a rental property owner to divulge all their books and records on their properties, including costs associated with the property, which could include the compensation of the resident manager, any fees being charged, and other items which could be privileged from discovery under the California Evidence Code. We also are unaware of any legitimate source to obtain data for that factor. And although there's been the conversation with the Rent Advisory Committee that on any of these factors, it's what is brought into arbitration, which we fully support, that the arbitrator should only consider items which either party brings into arbitration. In the regulations on page 10, there is a proposal under Section 5 that would allow the arbitrator to give him the discretion to require either party to provide cost information from categories not initially presented by the landlord or other financial information.
Mr. Howard, okay, and we may have questions for
Sure.
you to clarify some of that, okay?
Sure.
Questions from council? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. There was a statement made earlier that the changes that you are suggesting would weaken the ordinance as it relates to tenants. Do you agree or do you disagree?
Let me begin by saying that what we're proposing, we think, strikes a balance because it would allow the rental property owner to either pass on his or her increased cost of debt service, and if they cannot meet the quantitative standard, then the additional factors would come into play. I would say that it is, in our experience, and Project Sentinel, I hope, has this data, that there have been, in our recollection, only 2 debt service pass-throughs that have gone through the dispute resolution process in the past 10 years. So this is not an issue that is burning significant time or causing concern among the tenant or landlord community.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? If I could ask, in terms of how significant the or is for you, do you see this as some degree of significance for the landlords that that would not be accommodated by the language as it's currently proposed to us in some significant way? Because it sounds to me like as presented, the staff's report indicated with the RAC that this gives some degree of control to the tenants that would not ordinarily be available to them. Is that inaccurate?
What I would argue is that the or is important. First, let me state that our proposed modification. The current process is that if a property owner meets the standard that they can pass on 80% of the 70% of their increased debt. What is being proposed is that if they meet that quantitative standard, they then must meet this additional standard, which requires them to divulge and present other financial information, which we feel is unnecessary and irrelevant to the issue of the debt service pass-through.
Okay, so it's the additional analytic information that could be requested or required of the property owner?
Correct.
In arbitration?
Correct.
Is there an assumption that would occur, that there would be requests for information that would be invasive? Or is this just kind of a general protective cover that you're giving to the property owner?
Well, I would contend, first of all, that I'll go back to my initial point, that we have not seen a need for this change in policy. Second, we are unsure of what level of weight a hearing officer would give to any of these factors. And we're concerned that if you have a process that has been working for some time, what is the need for those changes?
So if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Correct. So what we were trying to propose was to balance the conversations that we participated in with the RAC for many years with some additional input and additional ways we felt were important to make this work for both parties.
And has it been your experience in arbitration, the few arbitration experiences that you've had here, that there is a desire for more information that would typically or should typically be considered private or confidential?
Having that we've not had a significant hearing in many years, I couldn't speak to that.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Howard, how would you answer the concern, as represented by Project Sentinel on behalf of the tenants, to assure that the debt service funds are actually going in to improve the property?
Well, that's what the capital improvement pass-through is generally designed to accommodate, which is a separate pass-through under the ordinance. But I would say that that rental property in Los Gatos is a desirable place to live. And one is not going to let their property fall into disrepair in a very desirable community that's a desirable place to live. And we have not seen, that I'm aware of, any instances where one has churned significant debt on their property and then led to a reduction in services.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Howard. There are no other cards on item number 9. I think someone would like to present, and if you would not mind bringing it up to the clerk, and then we can go ahead and hear what you have to say. And while the clerk is processing your card, go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Susan Fish, and I chaired the RAC committee for more than 20 years. I feel like I'm reassuming my neutral chair in tonight's discussion. My concern is we lived through some debt service passes that were subject to the old interpretation of the regulations and ordinance years ago, and we lost a very valuable member of our committee. When the Capri Apartments passed through debt, there were horrendous increases in the rents, and the tenant and one of the members of our committee was forced to move and leave Los Gatos. We took it as a job that there was a significant amount of clarification to not only reconcile the regs with the ordinance, but also to answer the questions that had come up through this process that wasn't going well. So many of the suggestions Mr. Howard talked about were presented by Tri-County to our committee. And it's important to remember that on our committee were 2 members that owned significant number of apartment complexes, and then there were 2 tenants as well as myself. We discussed these, we worked with them, we went through them. I mean, there was years, literally years and hours of time spent on this debt service. And what we have proposed to the council is the result of these 5 members listening to tremendous, and there was never a shortage of input from Tri-County or any other members of the community. What we're seeking to do is to clarify and reconcile the regs with the ordinances. I believe the changes that Mr. Howard suggests significantly modify and significantly change our recommendations and really undo. I mean, I know Regina uses the word weaken. I think it really reverses and just literally knocks the foundation out from what the committee stood for and what they felt was the right thing to do in making these clarifications.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Fish? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Any others who wish to speak to this item? Then I will close the public hearing and ask council to do further clarification with staff or make a motion. Councilwoman Spector.
The preface would be that I have always been very impressed with the Rent Advisory Committee and its chair. And I think that to, at this point in the game, change or consider changing what they have developed over 4 years, I believe, with input from the entire community, the rental and landlord community, would be something that I'm not prepared to do. And so with that preface, I would be going forward with the motion as outlined on page 1 of our staff report, with a question for the mayor, and that would be, would that first part be something that I should do, or is that something that the mayor would do?
Well, we want to introduce the ordinance amending Article 8 of Chapter 14 of the Los Gatos Town Code Rental Dispute Mediation Arbitration Ordinance. We can direct the clerk to read the title.
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Article 8 of Chapter 14 of the Town of Los Gatos Town Code, the Rental Dispute Mediation and Arbitration Ordinance.
All right. And then I believe you can proceed.
All right, I would direct the clerk administrator to read the title.
No, she just did.
All right, and then waive the reading, and then move to introduce the ordinance amending the Los Gatos Town Code, Chapter 14, Article 8, rental and other landlord-tenant disputes, and instruct the clerk administrator to publish a summary no more than 5 days prior to adoption.
That's a motion.
I'll second that motion.
And do we need anything further, Madam Attorney, before we move to a vote?
No, that's sufficient unless the maker of the motion wants to combine it with the adoption of the resolution.
Why don't we take those as separate? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mayor? Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I tried to spend a lot of time thinking this through, but in the end, it really comes down to the lengthy and arduous process that we've gone through as a community and with the people on our commission. And I just have to trust their judgment, and I think that's going to be the best way to go.
And I'd also like to say, first of all, appreciate all the work done, not only by the Rent Advisory Committee, but also Tri-Counties, because this has been a cooperative venture, and we wouldn't come to this point unless we had cooperation on both sides. And I know it's been a difficult and arduous task, but I think a very fair outcome for both sides. And appreciate the arguments being made by Tri-Counties, but at the same time understand that they are a cooperative organization with us in attempting to move our process forward. And it speaks well that there have been so few arbitrations necessary in the last decade or so. So with that, we have a motion and a second. Seeing no other discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And then if we can call back we have one more thing to do before we call them back. Okay, but be ready to call them back, Mr. Manager. We have the second part was an adoption of a resolution, and I think Councilwoman Spector wishes to go there.
Yes, so we can get our other two council members back. I'm going to move to adopt a resolution rescinding Resolution 2004-25, resolution of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos, rescinding Resolution 1999-14, resolution of the Town of Los Gatos, adopting revised rental dispute resolution regulations, and adopting revised rental dispute resolution regulations, and adopting revised rental dispute resolution regulations. Boy, is that a lot of work.
I was going to say, could you repeat that?
Yeah, I can, but you don't think you want
All
me
right,
to.
we have a motion.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. And they are back. Thank you very much, everyone who's participated in this process. This brings us to item number 10, which is architecture and site application, S11051. This is for the 90 to 160 Albright property and 14600 Winchester Boulevard. Owner LG Business Park LLC, and the applicant is John Schenk. We have staff to present, and I'd ask you to go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, council members, members of the public. I'm sure we all remember in August, the Town Council adopted a plan development ordinance for the subject site with direction for future architecture and site applications. Based on that action and direction, the applicant submitted an application for the first phase of the Albright Netflix campus, which includes the demolition of 5 of the existing buildings and then construction of 2 new buildings and a parking garage, as well as the intersection improvements for the new Winchester intersection. The Planning Commission reviewed architecture and site application on August 24th, and they ultimately provided a recommendation of approval of the project with some direction as outlined in the staff report. Following the Planning Commission hearing, the applicant prepared revised plans and a letter addressing what the direction the Planning Commission gave at the August 24th hearing. The consulting architect has reviewed the revised plans, and as outlined in his revised letter, there are two minor outstanding issues on Building E, which have to do with the secondary entry, and then a roof return that he still wants to work to see if that can get it resolved a little cleaner. And the architect for the applicants here, and he can probably much more articulately address those issues on the conversations that he has had with the architect. Also, we weren't able to get the consulting arborist to review the plans before the staff report went out. However, I've spoken with him, and from his previous recommendations, there are only two minor modifications that he recommends. As you come in from the new entry, just to the north of that new entry, you'll see a line that's a landscape wall, seat wall. It extends down, I guess, up to the north towards the new traffic circle. That needs to be pulled back about 5 feet to make sure that it doesn't interfere with an existing redwood in that location. The second modification has to do with the sewer and water lines, which will, if you look in between the two buildings, straight down, there's that landscape section that has two trees in it. They moved that because his initial concerns were that the seat wall was too close on the north side. So they moved the wall. However, that relocated the sewer line and water line, and so now those are about 5 feet closer than they can be, based on his previous recommendation of 15 feet from the last plans. So those are the two modifications that he flagged. The rest of the modifications he said they had addressed by pulling the westerly portion up by the existing entry away from that line of trees along Winchester Boulevard. They pulled it back to the existing curb cuts, so he was comfortable with that. And the other modifications they made with the sewer line at the corner of the garage to maintain the 4 trees but lose the one small Chinese pistache. So those two reviewed that. Lastly, the applicants engineer and architects have been working with town staff to clarify and finalize the entrance improvements. That has been done. We have Parks and Public Works staff here to answer any questions regarding that. There's also an exhibit that is not in your packet. It's behind you. It's a long sheet behind Councilwoman Spector, and that shows a little more clarification as to the improvements that would happen along some of those sections there of Winchester. I wanted to note a couple, obviously there was a lot of conversation at the Planning Commission meeting about the level of development of the plans at that stage. Timing, turning around, trying to get that information as clarified as possible. Subsequent to that meeting here, the applicant has worked hard to make even further refinement. We do have some minor outstanding issues. However, this is not uncommon for applications that come through. These last few minor modifications are routinely addressed by town staff, whether it be Parks and Public Works and or planning, in between Planning Commission and or council action, and then ultimately building permit issuance. This is not uncommon. We go through this process with almost all of our architecture and site applications that come through, and that's why we routinely have the conditions to meet the arborist's recommendations and the architect recommendations. They may not all be in the final plans, but we have a good idea of where we're going, and then staff works closely with the architect to make sure that those issues are addressed. Staff believes that the latest plans are in conformance with the plan development ordinance, with the town council's direction from earlier last month. And also, with addressing a substantial portion of the Planning Commission's direction from their meeting has been taken care of. As a result, staff recommends that the council approve the architecture and site application this evening. And with that, that concludes staff's report, and staff's available to answer any questions.
All right, questions for staff. Vice Mayor Rice.
How many buildings are being torn down for Phase 1 again?
5.
And how many square feet in those buildings?
I will get that. It's 100 and change, I think.
Okay, and the amount that's being added, I'm just looking for what the net number is.
Total demolished is 109,961. The net increase is 156,771.
Thank you. That was all I had.
All right, other questions for staff? Councilwoman Spector?
Thank you. At the Planning Commission hearing, the Planning Commission recommended that the applicant provide the council with the, if I understood it correctly, with the final intersection plan. Do I understand that these are the final intersection plans behind me?
Yes.
Okay. So nothing more needs to be done with that aspect of the plans?
I would defer to Mr. Rouhani, but I believe that answer to be yes.
Would you like to hear Mr. Rouhani's
Sure.
comment? Mr.
Because
Rouhani?
Mr. Rouhani was asked specifically by Mr. O'Donnell at the Planning Commission, will you have these plans finalized?
Yes, Councilmember Spector. The plans that you have behind you is the final plans for the project pertaining to Winchester Boulevard improvements, frontage improvements to the site. Obviously, as we work and continue to work with the applicant in their final construction documents, there's a lot of details which they would need to give the contractor to build it. But in terms of alignment, movements, all of that are finalized in the drawing behind you and also incorporated into the architectural plans on the other side of the wall.
I thank you. And one other question. The Planning Commission also recommended that the town council have the final plans incorporating the consulting architect's suggestions, or recommendations, I should say. Are those up here somewhere?
Absent the two areas I pointed out previously, these are those plans, and I think there's one paint swath, and the architect can speak to this, on one of the returns of the floating wall that hasn't been picked up here, but it's just changing the paint color to match the front.
So it's the paint color is the only thing that's missing at this juncture?
Except for the two items on Building E with the front entry and the roof return.
And when will that be determined?
That will be determined prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
If I might, while Mr. Rouhani has the microphone. In the Planning Commission discussion, there was some degree of consternation about the number of traffic signals within that corridor from Highway 85 to Lark, and then the issue of the potential to impact, I think it would be northbound Winchester, with that signalized intersection at the courtside crossing. I noticed in your new plans there is a traffic circle that is in place in the interior of the site. The concern was the backup that would occur were there like an intersection with a stop sign inside site. Has this traffic circle mitigated the concern that was expressed by the Planning Commission with the backup moving on to Winchester, in your opinion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. As we have worked, our staff, along with the applicants' consultants over the past few weeks, on all the fine-tuning and details of the traffic circulations in or off their site. Initially, there was some concept that instead of that traffic circle roundabout inside, there was going to be stop signs. That could possibly have some impacts in terms of any backups, but with the roundabout and traffic circle, that creates a free-flowing movements inside their site and also coming out to the newly to-be-built traffic intersection across from the courtside entrance.
All right, and then when you comment on the number of signals on Winchester, and the significance or the potential significance of having so many signals in sequence.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Again, there's been lots said about how many signals and various aspects of them. That's why we prepared the exhibit behind Councilmember Spector to clearly lay out that entire corridor. Basically, there are currently 2 signalized intersections on Winchester. One is at Winchester and Lark. The other one is Winchester and Wimbledon. As a part of this project, a newly signal will be built at the main entrance to their site, which opposes the main entrance to the court side. So we're looking at 3 signalized intersections from Highway 85 to Lark Avenue. These signals will be all synchronized together, so they will basically, as we have said previously, they will be working in concert with each other, which that would help the flow of traffic on Winchester Boulevard. We've studied this extensively, run models over it, and we feel comfortable that this will not degrade the traffic flow in Winchester anything beyond the limits that currently set and are based on town code.
And if I recall correctly, the assumption is with this signalization, we could achieve a level B, as in boy, in the traffic movements that occur there, rather than, I think we're at level D right now. Is that correct?
Actually, currently at Albright, which is a non-signalized intersection, that level of service is E, which is below. D is our minimum standard. After the improvements are done and the new signal built at the new entrance to the project, yes, that intersection will operate at level of B.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council? I'd like to address the issue of the treescape and any comments about the Planning Commission's issues with arborists, the interpretation. Mr. Paulson, would you be able to address this? Okay. I believe it was Commissioner Telesfor who was concerned about the treescape along Winchester and the preservation of that treescape and the ability to shield that. There was a concern about the possibility of a road cut that would run east of that that line of redwoods, I believe. And if I read this correctly, it sounds that there will be no new cut into that area. It's what exists currently. Is that correct?
Correct. The previous engineer drawings just drew a straight line across there, so they encroached into the planters more heavily. And so what the applicant has been able to do through working with our consulting arborist, their consultant from a landscape design perspective, is pull that back so that they're not going to go beyond the existing curb line. And they've actually, in fact, saved some of the existing planters, which you'll note there's, I think, 2, possibly 3, where they save existing trees that he was worried about in general, but they're going to keep the existing planters, so no encroachment beyond those existing curb cuts would occur.
All right, and then the other question, and this will be my last at this point. The arborist presentation seemed somewhat contradictory to what looked to be the final plan, the tree plan. Could you clarify if I was reading that incorrectly when I read the Planning Commission minutes? Because it seemed like there was a good deal of kind of confusion that was being generated by the presentation of the arborist. Some trees being at risk, while then there was a statement from staff saying, well, actually that's been revised, so those trees are not at risk. Comment about that discussion, because it seemed rather difficult to follow.
I don't recall exactly the exchange. However, we obviously have our consulting arborist. He had indicated a number of trees that we removed. He had indicated a number of trees that, if modifications weren't made, that would be at significant risk of decline. And so a lot of that conversation was, in fact, regarding that main line along Winchester, which was pulling the encroachment into the existing, because there's bays of parking there currently with finger islands and a couple little larger planters. And so making sure that we don't encroach beyond that existing curb cut was really the clarification so that we don't impact those. He has seen the latest revised plans, our consulting arborist, and believes that as long as they do not have to encroach past the existing curb cuts on those, that those trees in fact will be maintained in their current health.
All right, thank you. And I understand also there's an 11% decrease in the number of trees that were proposed to be removed.
Correct, sorry. The clarification is with the latest revision, there's 103 trees proposed to be removed. Additionally, there's a significant number more trees to be planted because they now have the planting plan for the new intersection entry. And so now actually the planting plan, they've also provided information on the town's tree replacement for each of those. And I believe that they are actually replacing based on town code for this first phase.
Thank you. No other questions? Then I believe we can go to our public. And I have cards here from John Shank, Richard Sharp, Bob Giannini, and David Wells. I assume this is your team. Okay. I'm going to allow you 10 minutes and, of course, questions. And then we have some other members of the public who would like to speak. So if you want to divide your 10 minutes up however you will, that's certainly up to you. Just introduce yourselves when you come to the mic for our listening and viewing audience.
Sure, I'm David Wells, the CFO of Netflix, and also a resident at 16128 Escobar in the La Sabana district. So I'm mainly here to answer questions, but I will take a minute just to thank the council and the staff for all the hard work. There's been a lot of hard work over the last 2 to 3 months, and it's all in the sense of trying to keep us on schedule for a early spring, late summer move-in date for 2013. So thank you for all the hard work.
Good evening, Mayor Brzezinski and members of the Town Council. My name is John Shank, 700 Emerson Street, Palo Alto. First, I'd like to thank David Wells quickly for prioritizing tonight's meeting and continuing to show Netflix commitment to this project and to continuing to grow the Netflix brand and company within the town's boundaries. Second, I would like to echo his comments and thank town staff for their hard work and help. Third, I'd like to present our A&S package and ask this evening that you follow the Planning Commission's recommendation and vote to approve the A&S application. And because it is A&S and about architecture and site, I'm going to hand this over very quickly to our architect, Bob Giannini of Form 4, and to our landscape architect, Rich Sharp of Studio 5 Design, to walk you through the project. And then, of course, we're all here to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, John. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Again, my name is Bob Giannini from Form 4 Architecture, San Francisco. And walking through the project quickly, of course, here's Winchester, the Creek Trail. There's about 16 feet of fall across the site, 85 on this side. This is the new signalized intersection that's opposite Courtside. And again, after working with all of staff and our engineers, we've determined that the roundabout is the way to go to get movement go through here. And just quickly to show you how it works on site, cars will come through. They can either make the first right and go down through the site, go to the existing buildings or enter the backside of the garage, or they can take the next right, go through the visitor parking area and enter the top side of the garage. And I can do this. We've set the design theme of the project to be campus in the park, and that's because we have all these wonderful existing trees that we're able to save and work with. So the way that really expresses itself is the row of existing redwood trees around the perimeter are going to be brought into the project in little fingers that come in at all the particular spots. But then once you get inside the project, it opens up into sort of a clearing where, again, using all the existing cedars, redwoods, pines that are in the center of the project to be the campus green. Okay. This is a view of when you first come into the project. So you've just come through the roundabout and you're heading toward the main entry and the visitor parking area. And the idea is you would park amongst the redwoods. We're calling that the Redwood Grove. And the buildings sort of funnel you to the entry. And the other thing that this slide shows is sort of about this kind of architecture, because you might say, why this style? It's a Mediterranean style. And the wonderful thing about this is it allows it to be a very human scale. It's made up of pieces that people can relate to, deep arcades, deep set windows, balconies, elements like this. So you see a balcony down here, you see a balcony up here, you can understand the scale, and that's kind of the definition of what gives a project scale that you wouldn't get if it was an all-glass building. This is a little bit closer up view as you're coming in through the main entry and heading toward the lobby. So the definition of a campus is really a collection or a series of spaces, and each space has its own personality. So if it was a university campus, you might say, I'll meet you at the Union, or I'll meet you at the Glade, and what have you. And that's kind of what you want to have happen. So we're very big on naming things, and it kind of keeps us honest about making sure they each do have character and personality. So you come into the project, again, you'd park amongst the redwood trees, enter into the lobby, and unlike sort of a traditional office building, which would have a lobby sort of buried in the center, this has the lobby in the center of the campus. And it has glass on three sides. And really what you want to do with something like this is to have people feel, just have a very good feeling about coming to the campus. You want them to get a sense of the company, and you want them to want to be there. If you're attracting employees, or if you have visitors coming to the company, or your own employees, it's all about making them feel like this is a place where I want to work or want to be. So what we've done is collected a bunch of the activators right around this main entry. So here's the lobby. Right above it is the bridge that kind of goes through the tops of the trees. You can connect inside the bridge at the 3rd floor or walk across to the top of the bridge on the 4th floor. There's a stair at either end of it and a tower. So what that does is that puts all the vertical circulation and all the circulation between buildings right where everybody can see it when you first come in, and you start to get a feeling of the buzz of the place and sort of what's going on there. Also, right outside is a terrace. We wanted to do something really special with it, so we're bringing in full-grown 40-year-old olives with big gnarled trunks and what have you. They're going to march right along through here. This will be the outdoor dining area from the cafe. But of course, in a company like this, that's used for productivity reasons. People can run into each other, meet. You can have one-on-ones, meet with your team or whatever. So the idea of having a terrace here that people can interact is very important to sort of the function of the campus. And again, you get to see all that when you first come into the project. The campus green in the center. Employees will come in and park in the garage, and from this point they can use either this entrance and go right into this building, or this entrance, walk through the campus green, or walk right onto the terrace, grab a cup of coffee as they're heading up to their office, what have you, meet people or whatever. So it's to really create, again, once you've sort of attracted people to the campus, you want to make sure that their life there is great once they're there. So that's how that whole experience would work. And these are just a couple of images. This is another campus we've done, and this kind of gives you the sense of sort of how those terrace areas and cafes fill up during the day and how people use them. This is a little bit more like what our project will be like, with sort of the Mediterranean look and the olive trees. We'll be introducing some trees with color, like these jacarandas and some Chinese pistache, to complement the existing trees that we're saving. This image is a little bit of what the little meeting areas within the campus green will be like, a different character, a little quieter, smaller scale. This image shows our particular terrace, computer image, so not quite the life of sort of real people, but it shows how all of this works, how you'd come out of the cafe. These would be walls that would be able to open completely, so it would be a complete indoor-outdoor kind of experience. This is looking back toward the lobby. This is the view from the campus green, looking back at the campus. And looking down from above, and you can see the campus green on the terrace and sort of the relationship of all the parts. And with that, there's a little bit of time left. I can turn it over to our landscape architect who could fill in a little bit about the particular planting.
That would be appropriate, and then we'll save questions for after the completion.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Rich Sharp, studio with Studio 5 Design Landscape Architects out of San Anselmo. Long trek down here. Happy to be here. And I'll just quickly touch on the campus. Bob covered most of conceptually what we're doing on the project, but let me get the pointer here and see if I can get this to work. But in terms of layering of plant material, as Bob said, we have the large redwoods around the perimeter. The do I have one more minute?
No, you have a couple more seconds.
Yeah. Everything about the campus was really about the existing trees. That's the soul of the place, and so that's what we're really trying to hit on. So the road geometry, positions of buildings, the way the circulation space, kind of the geometry of the circulation space is all geared towards preservation of existing trees. Not only preservation, but featuring those trees. I mean, it's there's some significant canopies out there. The cedar trees that sit here, the large pine that would sort of grace that dining terrace. The redwoods here, we're introducing more redwoods, as Bob said, in this zone. The stand of pines over here where you come in through the garage. I mean, all of those are going to add sort of an instant patina to the campus. You're going to have this larger building set against larger trees, and we think that's going to really not make it feel like a bunch of 24-inch box trees on the project. As Bob said, the dining terrace here with the olives, not only did they activate this sort of corridor, but also the bridge condition moving across, as he labeled here, the treetop bridge, where you actually move through the canopy of the olives.
Mr. Sharp, can we just ask you questions at this point?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Questions for our landscape architect? I have one.
Sure.
This is again a reflection on the Planning Commission. You're talking about these robust olives coming in, and I believe one of the planning commissioners said that our experience standard with olive trees is that it's not very pretty when they decide to drop. And you said, I believe, that there was some mitigation that would occur with the trees that you're going to plant?
There are, and there's actually two. I indicated one because we're so focused on the ancient olive character, which is a fruit-bearing tree if you were to specify an ancient olive tree. And that mitigation is an annual spray that prevents the tree from fruiting. But the other alternative, and we would look at this option as well, I think, is there's multiple cultivars of non-fruiting olives. There's San Gabriel, Swan Hill are two that come to mind, that if we could get them at that mature size, we could elect to go that route to reduce the amount of maintenance involved. But fruiting olives can be neutered with spray on an annual basis.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other question related to the type of plant and the relationship to the riparian corridor.
Correct.
At the creek. And I believe it was Commissioner Bourgeois.
Yes.
who put particular focus on that. Would you go to that for us and indicate how you are responding to the questions raised by the commissioner?
Absolutely. And there were a couple of plants on the list that Commissioner Bourgeois felt were invasive species, shouldn't be used in the creekside. We've taken those off our list. Our list is in compliance with the Santa Clara Valley Water District approved plant list. We are not doing any planting on the creekside, but his concern was any airborne condition with the trees, birds dropping seeds, anything that could, because we are, within a stone's throw of the creek, that could potentially bring that species onto the creek. So we went ahead and removed those from the list so that they're not an issue. Part of our planting scheme, we've set up a zone system where we have sort of a zone 1 through 4, 1 being all ornamental up against the building for courtyard areas, to a zone 4 all native as we're approaching anywhere in the periphery that would approach the creekside area. So the intent was never to use an invasive species anywhere near the creek, but again, just to make sure we're in compliance, we took those off the list.
Okay, I was out on the site today again, And a couple of things struck me. First of all, again, totally amazing tree canopy that already exists out there. But in terms of the parking structure along 85, there is a current, there is a building that sits right on 85 or right adjacent to 85 now that's going to go away. And there are a number of trees that exist kind of in the corner of 85 Winchester. In my understanding, that is going to remain. That is the intention.
And that was one of the arborist comments initially, was the utility line routing through there was going to impact, there's 4 conifers and then the Chinese pistache. I think 2 are fir and 2 are redwoods. And all of them are going to be impacted, but we've rerouted the utility line so that only the Chinese pistache, which is a 7-inch caliper tree, versus the conifers, which are 24 and 30-inch and 18-inch. They're all significant trees that provide a lot of screening. So we're saving all of those trees on that corner with the current utility alignment.
Now, in terms of the view impacts of the parking structure on the freeway, that would be from, south or rather north of Winchester all the way to Highway 17. What kind of tree screening is going to exist once that structure is in place as you're looking straight down the freeway, like from 17 north?
We have, currently there's a continuous run of sumacs. They're not very significant that are there right now at the very edge of the property. And what we're coming back with that we're bringing all the way down the project and down into this zone here are the Canary Island pine, so that it's a conifer. It'll go in large for the box size. It'll grow fast. It matches what's across the freeway on the existing campus. There's what looked like a preservation of an existing stand of pines. So we're trying to be consistent on both sides of the freeway. Okay. And that we're currently showing that running from here all the way down. The only interruption is here, and that's for an existing stand of redwoods that we're going to maintain.
Okay. And then I saw that there have been some changes from what our initial arborist report indicated in terms of the elimination of some trees, that there has been an identification of certain sites that are significant that were initially on that list to be removed and now have been restored. Would you point out for me what are the sites that you feel were particularly significant as you've looked at how we're positioning the buildings on the campus?
Sure. At the front here, this tree initially was impacted because the road was coming straight through, and as part of dropping the geometry down here and introducing the roundabout, we're preserving sort of a kind of a key anchor tree at the roundabout on the project. All of the trees that the planning staff discussed earlier here along this edge have been salvaged because we've maintained the existing curb line. This tree that are all pines project into existing islands, and we've maintained those. Previously, we had adjusted the spacing on the parking stalls, which not only impacted those trees, but it impacted some of the redwoods that sat behind the curb, whose roots were reaching out into those islands. So by reintroducing these islands in the exact position they're in now, we're preserving not only these 3 pines, but there was some additional redwoods, 2 additional redwoods here that we're saving. Also, we've reduced the geometry of the roundabout here. There were 2 trees that were outside of the paving, but within 15 feet of the curb that he felt those were falling into that category of highly vulnerable trees, and we've reduced this geometry so that we're hitting that that offset requirement that the arborist was mandating. Then, as he mentioned here as well, this sort of prow that came out that preserves these 2 featured cedar trees, we've offset this to hit the required setback from the arborist. And as was mentioned, we have to look at the adjusting the utility lines in there now too. Because we've moved this wall over, we have to address the proposed utilities in there as well, which we'll work through with our civil engineer. And then, let's see, where were the other? Then these are the trees we were just talking about here at the corner of the garage. We've maintained these 4. with losing the one Chinese pistache. There were some trees in here where we've adjusted this road geometry in an effort to maintain the trees here. There's a large existing sycamore here that we've adjusted the geometry in our pedestrian circulation to maintain that tree. These trees here are all in cutaways in the paving. We're bringing the promenade through the center of the project and then bringing it all the way down so we can connect to all the existing facilities and bring sort of everyone up to the cafeteria. And we've enlarged these cutaways here in an effort to minimize impact on tree roots there. The trees here, we've pulled the sidewalk away from the back of the parking lot to maintain those trees. And then there were a couple trees in the meadow that we had taken out because we didn't feel like they were in character with the meadow that we were trying to do. But in an effort to maintain the trees, we're keeping them in the plan, and I think we'll evaluate that as we get closer to permit if they really kind of fit. And if they have to come out, then we would just increase the counts of replacement trees or the in lieu fee to accommodate that.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councilwoman McNutt.
I have practically nothing left on my list after the mayor got through, but I do have one left. There was conversation in one of the many meetings regarding this project about the possibility of doing some early planting of trees, especially those that serve as screening. Is that still going to be a possibility? And if so, whereabouts on the site would those be?
I don't know that we've addressed that at this point in the project, but clearly between now and permit, we would be looking at identifying locations of that. Part of it is looking at now with the general contractor at the staging of how to keep buildings in operation while these are moving, keep utilities functioning, keep irrigation functioning out there on existing material. But if it were up to me, I think we would introduce, to the extent we can, these trees along 85 to mitigate the garage. Our goal is to put those in at a large box size. As part of the tree canopy replacement program, there are certain size, based on removal of certain size canopy, there are certain size canopy we need to put back. There are 48-inch box trees that we need to replace. You know, they could come in this location here so that we'll have, 20 plus feet of height immediately on those trees. I would say as soon as this road alignment is in, we could start to put some of these trees in here, which are additional cedars to sort of blend in with the stand of cedars that we have here. I think these trees in here we could put in, which are additional redwood trees, and this traffic island, if we could identify that zone. Because I think the goal is right now there's a single run of redwoods here. To bring these additional redwoods in here will give a lot of layering and depth to that stand of redwoods that we want to achieve. And get them, as you said, get them going before the buildings start to go up.
Mayor, did you only want
Please.
questions on landscape right now, or questions
No,
of
no,
the
no.
entire team?
Since we have our architect up right the landscape architect, we might want to see if there's any other questions. We can come back to this. You want to go to architecture at this point?
Yes, I'm not sure whether it's architecture. I had two other questions. One is impact to existing tenants on the site.
Okay, that doesn't sound like an landscape question. Yeah.
Sure. We are working out with the contractor now how the site will be fenced, how the protection will go in, so that the existing tenants, of which there'll be 5 buildings, and there's more than one tenant per building in a few cases. But their safety is, we've worked with fire on circulation and how will we preserve the traffic on what's currently Albright Way. The interim road's built first. They can then work through. I'm trying to think of anything else. We've communicated with them. They know what's coming. And then basically the fenced area will basically follow this line and then come across. Fire will be able to, in emergency services, will have gates to go into the construction zone, but everybody else will be kept out. And the initial improvements happen up here first, so that there's always a nice, safe, smooth path of travel for the existing tenants. And then the construction operations kind of get going in earnest after all of that is done as well.
You want another oddball question now? or-
Oddball question, yeah.
Okay, so this might be a question for Mr. Wells, I'm not sure. I'm intrigued with the cafe because it's looking so appealing. And I used to hang out at eBay, and they had some problems until they upped their security, where people figured out that non-employees could go in and enjoy a really great lunch at a really great price. So I was, this is going to be, on first appearance here, very attractive. So how are you going to control this so this doesn't become another restaurant destination for our residents and workers?
I hope it doesn't become another restaurant destination. But I think we have discussed that, and it's our intention to use psychological cues rather than to put a fence up around the buildings. And by psychological cues, those who have advised me who've built campuses like this that are relatively open, you can put landscaping barriers in front of access points so that people actually have to walk through key fob doors to actually access the sort of middle. We've discussed a number of sort of softer elements to try to restrict the access. That would be our first choice. If it gets abused, then obviously we'll have to address that further. But
I'm sure it's tied up with your general security issues anyway.
correct. We have other security issues like recruiters parking themselves in the middle of the campus and talking to our folks and stuff like that. So.
If I might add one point, the most powerful way to control that is, as you all know, everybody wears badges at these campuses, same at Netflix, and it's very awkward to actually be hanging out there for any amount of time. If you're not wearing a badge, you'll be approached by security.
And you think this was tough, wait till you try to go through a conditional use process for a restaurant, you know.
And Bob knows about the badge from firsthand
Yeah,
experience.
okay. Any other questions? All right. Any other questions for staff? I do have some questions for architecture. Okay. If I can kind of summarize what I heard in the Planning Commission's minutes, and I do think the Planning Commission acted very thoroughly within the constraints of their meeting outline. A lot of the questions centered on decisions that are in progress with our consulting architect. And I know that so many of them have been addressed in our report since then. But what are the remainders? I mean, there was some minor outstanding issues that were indicated by Mr. Paulson.
Right, and I've got those particular ones. Actually, we'll do the easiest one first. We're essentially complete, and we've worked very closely with Larry Cannon, the town architect, and addressed all the issues. And really, at this point of the project, we really have no more issues. We do have the two items that Mr. Paulson mentioned, and I can talk about them now. One was he was concerned about something we do all the time, and he brings up to us each time about sort of floating planes, and would prefer to have this return. The compromise we came up with was to change the color to the ochre color rather than the lighter color, and he's very happy with that now. So that issue really is completely
So that's
resolved.
the famous floating wall.
The
that was a
floating wall
concern.
issue,
Okay.
completely resolved. This is the other item that isn't resolved yet, but he's concerned about the way this roof ends right here, and also how the secondary entrance works on the second building, the building closest to the garage. Again, we want to downplay the lobby in this building because we want people to go to the main lobby over here. So what we've talked about with him will be to, we have an element on the building in many places where this piece of the building actually pops out a little bit, so it sort of bookends the little roof that goes between them. And that's our intention, is to pop this little piece out to capture this piece of roof. And that pop-out will look sort of like this over here. So we won't use this element here at the entry. We'll come up with a simple way to do this entry, and that's an item that we both agree we can easily work out between now and building permit. So those, to my knowledge, those are the all the items that are outstanding.
All right. Well, because there are a lot of items that we were working at a certain point in this process.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for our architect? Okay. Well, this is our last chance. Mr. Paulson, do you want to make any further comments or clarifications of these minor issues that you had mentioned and that have been mentioned right now? And is it, standard, as you had indicated, that we would get to this point in the PD process and have this number of minor issues to be dealt with, one of which sounds like it's resolved?
I don't have any further clarification, except for that it's not uncommon that we have changes, whether they're dictated through the consulting architect or arborist, or they're just things that from the original planning commission or council approval to building permit, something comes up through the architect that maybe they didn't see before, and so these issues get resolved during those times.
But it would be nothing substantive?
Correct.
Okay.
There is specific language in the approval procedures that gives the community development director the authority for minor changes, and then from there, her discretion, they may go either to the planning commission or council.
All right. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. I think we can close the...
Thank you very much.
That part and listen to members of our audience tonight. The first card is from Richard Allen.
Good evening. My name is Richard Allen. I live at 172 College Avenue in Los Gatos. The council is considering demolition of buildings on Albright Way, along with a number of mature trees, probably over 100. I believe that this action at this time is premature. The entire Albright Way project was approved predicated on this presumption that Netflix would occupy this campus when it was completed. I have not been able to determine that Netflix has yet signed any binding agreement to occupy this campus. And in the light of recent Netflix business developments, I think there's a probability, or a possibility at least, that they will never occupy this campus. Netflix businesses have recently suffered several serious setbacks. First, its price increase has caused many of its subscribers for streaming services to cancel. I'm going to quote from several articles that have appeared in business and investment forums. Second, last week, Starz Entertainment announced that it will no longer discuss contract renewals with Netflix. Netflix stock lost about 10% of its value following that announcement. And previously, Sony abruptly pulled its content from Netflix. Netflix characterized both of these actions as temporary, but programmers recognize that they have to balance the potential for long-term damage and dilution with the need for short-term revenue boosts. Third, the competitive landscape for streaming services has shifted. Hulu has so far been Netflix's sole competitor in the video streaming side of the business, but now Amazon is officially jumping into the video business, and so is Walmart. Netflix's recent price increase for its service bundle helps Amazon, Blockbuster, and Coinstar more than it helps Netflix itself. Consumers who want the traditional video service can return to Blockbuster Video or to Coinstar, while consumers who want streaming only can go to Amazon, Hulu, and Walmart. The bottom line is that Netflix's problems aren't confined to content, they extend to competition. If Netflix board of directors concludes that Netflix should reduce its space costs by leasing less expensive place elsewhere in Silicon Valley, and if the town prematurely demolishes the buildings and trees, we may find ourselves holding the bag with an eyesore. I urge you to delay this demolition until Netflix or some other company has made a real binding commitment to occupy the proposed campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And the applicants have a 5-minute rebuttal at the end. You can respond to that. The next presenter is Lee Quintana.
Good evening, Council. I would like to suggest that the approval of this ANS application be deferred for several reasons. The plan set for tonight's ANS approval hearing shows that the grading plans for Phase 1 are far more significantly, they exceed the grading amounts that were presented in the PD application. The mitigated negative declaration must use correct figures in its analysis. The parking study has been deferred to post-project approval. The mitigated negative declaration must consider any potential impacts for parking prior to project approval. The request ANS review at the Planning Commission of May 11th, I'm requesting that the minutes from the Planning Commission's meetings of May 11th and May 31st, which discussed the height restrictions, be included in the record. The mitigated negative declaration is seriously flawed and inaccurate, and the ANS should be deferred until adequate environmental study has been completed. To highlight just a few of the problems with the neg deck, the town's traffic analysis was flawed. It used the wrong baseline to study impacts. The baseline that is required is to use existing conditions, not those that have been approved for the site. The traffic studies for the new entrance and signal were not included in the staff's report and are not included in the mitigated negative declaration. Apparently, they're not available here either. And lastly, well, not lastly, if I have more time, I'll add more. The assumption that in a negative declaration that you can balance impacts against benefit is incorrect. Any substantial evidence of potential impacts triggers an EIR. At the negative declaration stage, the balancing cannot occur. I have other questions. I'd like to state that the summary minutes were inaccurate. I'm not going to go into exactly in detail, but I had indicated that one of the things was that the application was not consistent with the PD ordinance, and I still believe it isn't, in that the complete set for the plans were not submitted on August 2nd. In fact, they were resubmitted on August 10th, resubmitted on August 25th.
Thank you, Ms. Quintana.
Oh, I have 3 seconds left. It says that.
Still? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Quintana. And our last presenter, unless someone else would like to speak, is Amy Despars.
Hi, my name's Amy Despars. I've stood before you in July to talk about this project, and I want to just thank the Planning Commission and the town for really thoroughly looking at the plans, from everything from the architecture to really preserving the trees. But for me, as a parent, a second-generation Los Gatos and a Los Gatos Union School District teacher for the last 18 years, I just want to thank you for denying residential and putting in senior housing. I think it's just really, really imperative to our schools. And I'm standing here also to ask you that with the further developments that going on here in town, more homes have been asked to be approved. I gave you a list last year, in July, everything from the Guadalupe Mines to Swanson Ford to Honda to Ditto's Lane to the new Shannon and Los Gatos Boulevard to 5 homes on Blossom Hill and Short Road. I hope you continue to thoroughly investigate all the developments that are going on and really look at what you've done today, because I think it makes more sense for our community, and I want to thank you. I do have a side question that doesn't really apply to this development, but it could. I live at the end of Long Ridge and Gateway, where the applicant has just recently reapplied for an extension, yet the property has not been upkept. I have pictures right here. This is what I look at every day when I leave my house. I look at trash. I look at weeds. I look at overgrown plants.
You may want to take the mic if you're going to
Take it away.
say a few things.
I look at trash, overgrown weeds, trees that are not being taken care of properly. And you can see these pictures right here. This is what we look at every single day when we drive by. And my concern is they've asked for an extension for another year, and it's been granted, yet they can't keep up with what they have right now. And I think that's just a problem in our town. I'm seeing it at the Chevy dealership right now. Those trees are dying. Those magnolia trees are dying. And I think we just have to be aware with all the developers that are developing here that they should not be granted extensions if they cannot keep up with what they have. And also the developer on the Gateway, I've found out, also would like to change the plans. So we had asked for some commercial, and he wants to go back to dental medical. And I think we just need to be aware of that as a town, that once plans have been approved, we worked with them for months on that, and now they get an extension, they don't take care of the property, and yet here they're going to try to change the plans again. So I just hope you consider that, and thank you for being so thorough on the Albright. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Despars. And we have one more card from Catherine Lee. And this is the last card, so anyone else wants to speak, just get that buff card up here when you can. Ms. Lee.
Hi, my name is Catherine Lee, and I live in the neighborhood off Wimbledon for 25 years. I'd like to first say that I'm not against the project. I'm for progress, but I'm not for progress's sake. And plus, since the original approval for the project to go through, it seems like the rest has happened in a very rushed manner. Two things. One, the traffic, limiting the traffic discussion to only 3 signals is kind of fuzzy math or disingenuous at best. If my count, it's Lark, and then it's Wimbledon, then it's the new one at Courtside, then it's the train crossing. That's up to 4. Then there's the one at 85 on the other side of the 85 and down at Knowles. So now we're up to 7 signals. So within a short walking distance. And if you go the other way, now we have the new sports park at University, which is a block off of Lark the other way. And that traffic situation has always been bad. So I do not think that we have done a thorough job in understanding what the traffic issues are, especially now that we're throwing kids and bikes and skateboards into the mix. Please delay because of that. The second issue, and I'm glad Mr. Wells is here. I'm not sure where he's going to sit if he moves to this campus, but I suggest he sits at the front entrance at the far corner, because as far as I can tell, there's only one exit out of that site, which surprises me. I don't know if Fire's reviewed these plans. I mean, I know you have to have 2 exits out of a building, and you only have 1 exit out of a site. And that really surprises me, because in case of a disaster of any type, especially with all of our wonderful trees and the parking structure being way, way, way at the back end of the site, I don't think anybody, if you've been through Loma Prieta, you know that people rush out. They're going to get out of that site. The parking structure is in the exact wrong place at the site and really needs to be looked at. And thirdly, I just think this rush to not look at those kinds of things thoroughly is a bad influence or bad suggestion on the brand of the town and the brand of Netflix. And I wish that both groups would look at it thoroughly and delay it before we rush into a large disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Again, anyone else wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, then I'd call the applicant back. You have 5 minutes to address the issues raised by the public.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just looking at my notes here from the speakers, the first point I'd like to make is that each and every of our applications, and I think we've all been clear, well, we're working kind of hand in glove with Netflix as our tenant. The applications and the decisions before the planning commissioners, as well as yourselves, have been tenant agnostic, if you will. I think David Wells' presence here tonight speaks volumes to their commitment, as I mentioned earlier. unfortunately, it seems there's a lack of information flowing around. I think, well, we believe firmly and very strongly that all of the environmental analysis that has been done, as well as all of the other analyses that have taken place, have been done very thoroughly. Very quick, like highlights here on the traffic side. In the traffic report, I think there's 18 intersections that the town, as well as the town's environmental consultant, had us analyze in that report. It was one of the largest traffic studies that have been done. And the piece that we're focused on tonight was to try to focus and answer a specific question that came up at the Planning Commission's hearing. The analysis has been far more thorough and robust than that. And then in terms, I mean, just obviously something we're all very concerned with each time we move forward with any development, and that's safety. And the fire department has been consulted, early on in our design and throughout the design. And the site has emergency access in and out the back on Charter Oaks, emergency access, not permanent access, as well as out not just the 2 current entries that we have on Winchester, but we will now have 3 points on Winchester, the 2 right-in, right-outs, as well as the full signalized intersection. And people can walk to the creek trail as well. We're not trapped in the site in case of a fire or other kind of emergency. In any event, happy to answer any other questions. Other than that, I will thank you, and I will ask you again very respectfully for your approval of our application.
It looks like Mr. Wells wanted to say something. Yes.
Just one thing, I didn't want to leave John hanging out there on our commitment. So we most assuredly will face increased competition. I can't think of too many businesses that are successful that don't face increasing competition, but it hasn't changed our space plan needs. And we made the decision that we'd like to stay here, and I don't really have another option. And we still need this space, and I'd like to keep it on schedule. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, any other questions from council? Then we're going to close the public hearing.
Thank you again.
Okay. All right, council, we have an opportunity to discuss further or make a motion. Members of council. Vice Mayor Rice.
I guess a procedural question. We have some 7 specific actions for which a motion is required. Can they be done as a single motion for recommended action? Do they need to be done individually? How do we need to address that?
Well, the town attorney can address that.
It can be made as one motion, or you can break it apart and discuss it as the council's preference tonight.
All right, so you're free to do what you wish. My preference would be probably to do it piece by piece. I know it makes it more complicated, but it allows us to actually weigh in on each of the items as we go. But you're free to do it whichever way you want.
And I will. Then I'm going to go ahead and move the recommended actions in our staff report, items 2 through 8, as per in the recommended actions.
Okay, is there a second to that?
Second.
Oh, there is a second. Okay. I will explain what I was looking for. Each of these as a separate motion would allow us to weigh in on individual pieces if we had some discussion that was relevant to each. And given the complexity of the proposal, there may be comments that members of council would like to make to clarify a position that they're taking at this time. So that's why I was making the other recommendation, even though it would obviously be appropriate to move this as a single recommended item. So that would be my recommendation, and there is a motion and a second. And I'd ask the seconder of the motion to comment.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like, if anyone is going to not vote yes on this motion, it would be helpful to know in advance whether it's because they do have questions and want it broken down step by step, or whether they're just prepared to vote no. Does that make sense?
That's a good point. If I may paraphrase then, if there are questions that still remain on any of the issues that we will be voting on, as a single motion, according to the motion maker. Any wish or desire to clarify at this point from members of council? I'm going to say I'll support the motion. I think that even though I absolutely appreciate the comments made tonight, and I think Mr. Allen's comments were spot on when it came to some of the specifics that I myself have dealt with in the last few days, because it's been a very active climate out there for the Netflix organization in the media, and the issues are not without some concern, because we definitely want Netflix to be a thriving corporation and continue to be part of our town brand. But I do appreciate the complexity of the current environment in relationship to this particular industry. But I also appreciate the fact that it's best to know that now and to realize that we're making a decision based on the current climate and the current, in some ways, the competition that's out there, rather than make a decision and then be surprised 6 or 8 months down the line. So with that in mind, I do appreciate Mr. Allen's comments. I also think that the question of a delay at this point seems counterintuitive, given where we are in the process and how far we've gone in the time frame that we've gone, and all the input we've gotten, particularly from our Planning Commission, which I think really gave us some good insight into looking at this final plan in a great deal of detail, and realizing that this is not without some difficulty to go through this entire process. But as I look at where we are now, from the time we first looked at the plan, I think there's been a real significant evolution, particularly in the architectural and in the landscape, that had we not had the input from the Planning Commission and the dialogue with staff, and the public, we would not have been nearly in as good a position as we are now. So I am comfortable in supporting the motion. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I just want to concur with the sentiment of what the mayor is saying. This has gone a long way, and the reason I made the motion, and I'm comfortable making it relatively all-encompassing, is the amount of work that has gone to this point. And again, echoing what the mayor said, the Planning Commission did a lot of heavy lifting on the original application. They did a lot of heavy lifting on the ANS within the constraints that they had. The applicant has worked with the consulting architect. We've got down to really very, very minor issues there. I think that what we've got is a very complete package, and I don't think anybody in this town is going to be surprised with what they see. We've got a good picture of it. So I just wanted to give that background as to how I got to where I got to.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Councilwoman Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to commend the Planning Commission also. I realize in listening to their hearing that they were frustrated. They were frustrated by the limitations on their discretion in analyzing an architecture and site application. They were frustrated by the limited amount of time they had, that they had incomplete plans, that they couldn't continue the hearing because the town council hearing was already scheduled. And so within that level of frustration, I do commend them for thinking that the best they could do is make to give their input to the council, and I appreciate that they did do that. So kudos to the Planning Commission. In May, they had a special meeting and they moved forward on this project with only 3 people participating. And so they have been under a very tight time frame and a lot of limitations. As the project now stands before us, I think one of the planning commissioners or several of the planning commissioners made the comment that they assumed that it would be approved by the council. And as we can see, based upon what has been said so far, it will be. but I will not be supporting the motion. And you think, well, how can you not support a motion because this is an architecture and site application that is being based upon a plan development, and that all the applicant has to do is come up with an ANS that complies with the plan development. Well, I did not support the plan development. I did not support the development agreement. I did not support the negative declaration. And I can say that since the time of my vote on the negative declaration, or the EIR, or lack thereof, nothing has changed. And so the negative declaration remains inappropriate for reasons that are reflected in the document, including aesthetics, which goes to the height, mass, and location of any building. And that remains the crux of my concern about this project, and it was the crux of the concerns of those who spoke several weeks ago, if not a month ago, when they were here, which is everybody said this would be great for Class A office building. We just don't want an 85-foot buildings with the highest trees, even if they're already there, being 40 feet. And so I cannot support a negative declaration. This project does not comply with our architecture and site ordinance, which includes consideration of things like buildings, which includes siting, mass, and height. And so for those reasons, I will not be supporting the motion. But again, I thank the Planning Commission for their efforts.
Any other comments? I would like to make a comment. Rational minds can disagree. And as I understand the process of the public dialogue, the fact that we had 2 meetings, and in the first meeting, 3 hours of public testimony, basically an even split between the people who were in favor and people who were opposed. And we limited the amount of presentation to 2 minutes versus 3 because we had so many people speaking at the first. And then in the second meeting, there was definitely 2 hours, and the primary interest was in opposition. But as I look at not only the presentations from our public here in the House, but also comments made in emails and in contacts on the rest of the members of the community in casual passing, there's a strong feeling in a very large portion of this community that favors this project and favors Netflix continuing in this community, and has made it very clear to me that if we were to jeopardize Netflix's continued presence in the community, that it would be counter to what a very large component of our community, perhaps the majority, believe. I think in addition to that as I look at the various uses of the plan development ordinance and our issues related to good architecture, there's been a strenuous effort to make good on the promise that we've made to maintain the architectural integrity of the community, and through the plan development process to enable us to create something that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to create because we have the umbrella of the plan development. So, as again I said, rational minds can disagree. We can interpret things variously, and I do think that all parties involved have done a yeoman's job in bringing us to this point, and therefore, as I said, I'm more than willing to support this motion. Any other comments from members of the council? Seeing none, then I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Passes 3-2. Councilman Leonardis and Councilmember Spector in opposition. All right. I believe that concludes tonight's meeting, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.